So here's the scam hiding in plain sight. Since 1979, US productivity rose 61.8%, but typical hourly pay rose only 17.5% after inflation. That's roughly a 4.4 to 1 split. If you feel like you're sprinting on a treadmill that's speeding up while your paycheck stays stuck, you're not crazy. You're accurately reading the machine. In this video, we'll trace exactly how that link got cut, why the gains didn't disappear, and where they actually went. Then we'll hit the second trap, why a great salary city can still make you feel broke. So when your boss hits you with, "We crushed it this year," and your raise shows up like spare change stuck in the couch, there's a reason. And no, it's not because you didn't advocate for yourself hard enough or because your title isn't fancy. The math doesn't care about your title. Here's the clean version. From 1979 to 2022, output per hour in the US jumped 64.7%. That means the average hour of work produces way more value than it used to. Over that same stretch, the hourly pay for production and non-supervisory workers, roughly 80% of the workforce, aka most people who keep things running, grew only 14.8% after inflation. That's the whole story of modern adulthood right there. A 4.4 to 1 gap between what work produces and what typical workers take home. If pay had moved with productivity, your normal hour would buy a noticeably different life. Not luxury, just less constant math. You'd feel it in rent that doesn't swallow your week, in health bills that don't turn into a weird game of "do I really need this?" in childcare that doesn't cost like a second mortgage. Groceries wouldn't feel like a weekly prank. The point isn't that everyone would be living like a celebrity. It's that the baseline would be sturdier. But here's the catch. This isn't a broken machine. It's a machine doing exactly what it's set up to do. When people say the economy is rigged, they usually mean it's glitched, like somebody forgot to plug something in. Nope, the plug is in. The settings changed, because the missing money didn't vanish into the ether. It shows up in two places that most of us don't see on a pay stub. 1, a bigger slice goes to very high earners inside companies. 2, a bigger slice goes to profits for owners and shareholders. Same pie, different cutting. Your job got more productive, the total value rose, and the payouts tilted up and away. There's a term for the scoreboard behind all this, and you should keep it in your pocket. Labor share. Labor share is simply the portion of national income that goes to workers as wages and benefits, versus what goes to owners as profits and other capital income. It's the difference between the economy grew and I can actually afford the economy. When labor share drops, you can work in a booming country and still feel like your bank account lives in a drought. And before somebody runs the classic cope, maybe workers just aren't as productive anymore, the data flatly says no. Productivity surged. The average hour got more valuable. The link snapped anyway. So when you get told work harder like it's a magic spell, understand what you're being sold. It's like paying for a gym membership where your workouts only make someone else's before and after photo look amazing. You do the reps, the gains go somewhere else. That's what makes the 4.4 to 1 split so nasty. It's not about one company being cheap. It's not about one industry. It's an economy-wide pattern across decades, with the biggest chunk of the workforce watching the value of their time rise while their slice barely budges in real terms. And you're not ready for what's next, because this gap didn't open from one headline event. It wasn't one recession, one CEO, one nobody wants to work rant. It was a stack of policy switches, flipped over years, that changed bargaining power so quietly most people only noticed the symptoms. Weaker raises, more debt, more side hustles, and that constant sense that the ladder got taller. So what does that 4.4 to 1 ratio actually mean for you? It means you weren't failing at adulthood. Your output kept rising. The payout rules redirected the gains upward for decades, and then everyone acted confused when you started feeling stuck. So now the real question isn't, why aren't you richer? It's, who rewired the payout rules, and how did they pull it off without most people noticing? That pay productivity link didn't fade. Somebody unplugged it, then acted like the cord was never there. And the wild part is the switches that did it sound like the kind of stuff you'd skip in a high school textbook. Until you realize those boring decisions basically decide your rent. Start in the late 1970s, because that's when the whole vibe changes. Productivity can rise all day, but your paycheck doesn't automatically follow it. Wages move when workers can negotiate. That's bargaining power. If you can credibly say, pay us more or this place doesn't run, you get a cut of the extra value you're creating. If you can't say that, the extra value just becomes, Somebody else's problem solved. Mechanism number 1 is unions getting kneecapped. Union density and collective bargaining coverage drop hard after the late 70s. And that matters for a simple reason. Fewer workers end up under contracts where pay increases get negotiated instead of politely requested. When fewer workplaces have collective bargaining, fewer workplaces have any built-in system that says, hey, output went up, so wages go up too. The default becomes the boss setting competitive pay, the same way a landlord sets rent, as high as they can and as low as they can get away with at the same time. But here's what nobody tells you. Unions don't only affect union members. They create a spillover wage standard. If a union shop down the road pays more, non-union employers feel pressure to match it because they still need workers who can do the job. When unions weaken, that pressure evaporates, and market rate stops, meaning the going fair price for labor, and starts meaning the lowest number that won't make the place catch fire. It's a race to the bottom with a nicer font. So companies don't need to share the productivity gains through broad wage growth anymore. They can route the money into executive compensation or straight into profits and still keep the operation staffed because the outside options for workers get worse. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just negotiating 101. Mechanism number 2 is the minimum wage turning into a museum exhibit. The federal minimum wage doesn't keep up with inflation and productivity the way people assume it does. And if you want the simplest way to think about it, treat the minimum wage like a thermostat. When you set a floor and you keep adjusting it as the economy grows, it pulls the whole room upward. Not just the absolute lowest wage, but the rungs above it too, because employers still have to maintain pay differences to hire and retain people. When that thermostat doesn't get adjusted, the room gets colder. The bottom doesn't rise, so the middle doesn't feel upward pressure either. Suddenly, a lot more jobs can pay not much more than the minimum, because the minimum itself is lagging behind everything else. It's real. It's happening. Here's the payoff. Unions push wages up from the middle. The minimum wage lifts from the bottom. That's the two-part mechanism. Remove both supports, and the productivity gains don't disappear. They get absorbed somewhere else. Higher profits, higher pay at the very top, or even price increases. Anything but your hourly rate.